Hello guys, in this video, I'm going to show you how to create this fighting game in Python using Pygame. I'm going to code this game from scratch, so I will take you through the entire process including setting up the game, loop creating the players, adding animation, and then setting up all the fighting mechanics around that. So let's just jump straight into the code and begin with the project setup. So first now, you will need to make sure you have a Python and Pygame installed on your machine. And then, you will need some kind of editors to type your code in. Now, there's different ones to choose from, but I use Visual Studio. Now, first of all, we need to import Pygame, and then we initialize Pygames by saying pygame.init. After that, I will create my game window. So I'll add a little note here to say create game window, and I will set a couple of variables for it. So the first one is going to be, so I say screen width is equals to 1000 pixels, and then the second one is the screen height, which is I will make equal to 600 pixels. Now we'll create the game window itself, so I'll say screen remove caps screen is equals to pygame.display.set underscore mode. So this function will create the game window for me and will assign it to this variable screen. Now, this will make two initial arguments, and these are the screen width and the screen height. Now, with that done, I'm just going to give this window a title. So I'll say pygame.display.set underscore caption, and I will call this LAPU versus MAGE. Well, actually, let's name that into LAPU versus me. Now that this Python is complete and is finished, so what I actually need to do is to add in what's called the game loop. So now let's add that. The game loop will allow the game to continuously run, take actions, draw the players, and everything on the screen until I actually choose to exit. So this is going to be done with the first of the declaring a variable and then setting up the loop based on that variable. So I'll add comment here to say game loop, and I'm going to create a variable called run. So first of all, I will set this variable to true and then add my while loop. So I'll say that while run, which is shorthand for saying while run is true, execute all the code below this. Now if I was to run this just now, I would hang up because this run variable is going to be true and we're just going to be stuck inside the while loop eternally. So I need a way to now exiting this while loop, and for that I'm going to add an in event. So we'll add a comment to say event handler, and I'm going to cycle through the available events by saying for event in pygame.event.get, and I'm going to be looking for a specific event at the moment. So I'll say if event.type is equal to pygame.quit, which is just when you click on the X in the top right corner of the screen or of this particular window that we're just about to create. Well, when that happens, I want to be kicked out of this while loop. I don't want us to continue running now. I know that this while loop is running based on this variable run, so as long as this variable is set to true, this condition is going to be met, and I'm going to be within this loop. So that means if I want to exit the loop, I just need to change this variable from true to false. So let's just add that in where we'll say run equals to false. So now, if I run this game again, now you can see the game window has come up. It's in the dimension that I've specified. And I can see that the little title up here that I've just set it as LAPU versus me. And now if I click the X up here, the game shuts down. Now, just to tidy up things up and the end after we exit the while loop, I just want to quit by game. So I'll add a comment to say exit by game, and we'll type pygame.quit. So right at the beginning, we had the pygame.init, but then once the while loop is finished and we have essentially ended the game, I want to just have pygame to close everything out, so that I essentially that's the basic of the game loop. So now the game is set up. At the moment, I've all got is this black screen. So the next thing that I like to do is to add in a background image. Now to do that, I'm going to above my while loop. So you never want to be loading images within your game loop. You want to do all of that beforehand. So just underneath where I've created my game window, I'm going to add a little comment to say load background. As you can see in my game before, the background is moving. So now we'll initialize a bg frames variable equals to an array bracket. So here we're calling it a for I in range of 8 because my frames is 8. So now I append the images on the bg frames array I set. So now bg underscore frames dot append I will use the function pygame.imageLoad. And here, I just need to give the location of this file. Now, this is where the folder structure is so important. So from here, which is the root folder, this brother tutorial, I'm going into the next folder down assets. And then I'm going another folder down which is images, then backgrounds, and their background, so background images. So I need to make sure that I give it this correct location, otherwise it won't be able to find this file. So from the root folder, we go into assets, then it's images, then it's background. And then finally, it's background picture. Now, if you run into any errors at this point that says the file cannot be found, then chances are it's something to do with this folder structure being a little bit different from what I've got set up here. So essentially, it's just not able to find the folder or the file in the location that you're saying here. So that with the explain, I cannot hide this panel on the left side. We don't need it just now. And the last thing to do add here is that convert underscore alpha. Now if I run this, nothing actually changes, so I still get a blank screen now. Although I've loaded this background image into a memory, I've not actually said to Pygame that I want this image to be drawn on the screen, so that's what missing here. So what I will do is I will add a new function that I can call within the game loop. So let's just go down here and define a new function, add a comment to say a function for drawing background, and I'll say def for define draw underscore bg. Now this doesn't need to take any argument, so I just leave this parenthesis blank. So now I set a global variable here, which is frame index, an integer that keeps track of the current frame index in an animation sequence. Frame timer, a timer that measures the time elapses since the last frame update. Now, scaling and drawing the background image. The function scales a background image using pygame that transform that scale and draw it on the screen using screen blitz. The scaled underscore bg image is created by scaling the current frame to fit the screen dimension, screen width, and screen height that we initialize. The scaled image is then drawn on the screen at position 0, 0 using screen.width. Now, let's define the global variables for frame index and timer. Frame index equals to 0, timer equals to 0. Then, the frame duration is equals to 100. Duration for each frame in milliseconds. Now, let's do the updating the frame index and timer. The function updates the frame index and the frame timer. Variables to animate the background image. Clock.getTime returns the time elapses since the last call to clock.tip. If frame underscore timer exceeds frame duration, the constant that represented the duration of each frame, the timer is reset by subtracting the frame duration from it. The frame index is incremented by 1, wrapping around to 0 if it reached the end of the BG frames list using the modulo operator len BG underscore frames. Now define a clock variable which will be pygame.time.clock, and then I define a variable for my frame rate. So this will be set to 60 frames per second. Now I can go into my main game loop again down here, and the very first thing I do before I even draw the background is I just say clock, which I've just created. So now that we call the function drawVG, now let's run this again, and still nothing has changed. I'm still getting a blank screen even though I'm calling this function. So that what's going on here? So throughout this game loop, there's going to be a lot of different updates. So although I've got a moment is the background being drawn, I will eventually have players and they will be moving around the screen. And so on, all of that stuff is going to be happening within this game loop. So what we need to do right at the end of it, all below the event handler but still indented to make sure that this is part of the release while loop. We need to call a function that's going to take all of those changes, and it's going to update the display with them. So add a comment to say update display and say pygame.display.update. And if I run this again, now I have background that it is moving. So now that our background is finished, so we can create a fighter class. Now we can start working on the two fighters. So I can go into this fighter file, and this is where I'm going to create all the functionality for them. I'll say first of all import pygame, and then I will set up the fighter in class. Now within your class, you always have to begin with your constructor, so that's this init method. So we'll say define init and always put the self argument first, and then you have your x and then y coordinates as the next arguments. There's going to be a lot more as we work to this fighter class, but for now, we just want to start simple and just make sure that we get this drawn on the screen. First of all, so rather than loading my image or anything like that, I'm just going to use rectangles to begin with. So assign a rectangle to do this constructor. So I'll self.rect is equals to pygame.rect with a capital R, and this will create a new rectangle object now. This is going to take a few arguments. So the first two are the position on the screen. Well, that's those x and y arguments and that I'm passing in here. So the x and y coordinates are going to determine where this rectangle is drawn, and then I need to give it a width and a height. So I'm going to say 80 pixels wide and 180 pixels tall. And for now, I'm just going to go back into my main file, and now to access the functionality from this, I need to make sure that I import it into my main file. So up at the top where I'm exporting Pygame, I also need to import this Python class. So say from Python, which is the name of the Python file, import Python that with a capital F because that's the name of the class. So we're basically saying that from this file, import this class here and all the functionality that's come with it. Now that I've imported this, I can go ahead and create instances of the class, just like I normally would if I decode. So underneath my function and just above my game loop, I'm going to create my two instances. So say create two instances of Pythons, and the first one is going to be called Python underscore 1, and it's going to be an instances of the Python class, and the only argument I need to give it are x and y coordinates. So let's say 200x and 360y, and we just copy this down and repeat it again for Python 2. So this one's going to be the same y coordinate, but it's going to be further over the right hand side of the screen. So we'll say 700 pixels now. If I run this code, it executes fine. So I know that these two files are talking to each other correctly, but nothing is showing up on the screen. So I have created the instances of the Pythons, but I'm not drawing them anywhere. So for that, I go back into this Python class here and I add an additional method. So we'll say def draw and pass in the first argument is always self, and the second argument is going to be surfaces. So the surface is going to be essentially the game window that we're going to be drawing this Python onto for the time being. I don't actually have an image, but what I do have for each of the fighter classes is this rectangle. So I'm just going to draw a rectangle onto the screen to represent the player. So we'll say pygame.draw.rect, and where do I want to draw it onto? So that's going to be my surface. Then I need to give it a color. So we'll say 25500 for red. And then lastly, I want to give it the rectangle that's going to be drawn, which is self.rect. So the method is created, but now I need to make sure that I'm actually calling this draw method from my main game loop. So I'm going to come down here within the game loop, just underneath where I'm drawing my background, and I'm going to create a space and just add a comment to say draw fighters, and now we can call those instances. So it's going to be a fighter 1, and we can call the draw method. Now remember, the draw method took an argument which was the surface. Now, in my case, my surface is called screen. So I'm going to pass a screen here as an argument, and then I can copy and paste this down for my second fighter. Now, if we run this code, what should I get is a rectangle representing each of the fighters. So this part of it is working correctly. Now we can begin working on player controls and player movement. So I go player controls back into my fighter class here, and just below the constructor, I'm going to create another method. This would be called move. So define move. The only argument that it takes is itself. First of all, I just want to set a couple of variables here. The first one is going to be a speed. So set speed to 10, and this will just allow me to easily control how quickly the players move and around the screen. So if it's too slow or too fast, I'll just come on and tweak this one variable. Next, there's a couple more variables I need to define, which are the x and dy, and I will set both of these to 0. So these variables are by delta variables. So the change, basically it's the change in x coordinates and the change in the y coordinates. So because these are initially sets to 0, it's just saying nothing is changing. So the position of the player is stationary. Next is I need to get key presses. So I'm going to save this in this variable key, and I can say key equals pygame.k.get_press So whenever you press anything on the keyboard, it will register it within this variable. Here and now, I can look for movement key presses. So another comment to say movement, and here I can look through this key variable and look for particular key being pressed. So movement left and right is going to be done by A and D. So I'm using WASD controls for player 1 and then the arrow key for the player 2. But we'll come on to that in a minute. So to figure it out, which is if this button have been pressed or not, all I do is to say if key and we'll say pi.game K, capital K underscore, and then the letter of the key that you want to check. So in this case, I want to check for the letter A being pressed. So that's I'm moving to the left. Well, if that's happened, then this dx variable, this delta x is no longer 0. We're not stationary anymore. We're actually trying to move to the left. So moving to the left means that the x coordinate needs to decrease and become a negative value. So I set my dx to negative speed. Then I can do the exact same thing here. Just copy this down. But for moving to the right, so if I'm moving to the right, it's the D button that I'm looking for. And then the dx variable just becomes speed. Now I can use this information to update the position of the rectangle. So right at the end of this move method, I'll just say update player position. So set.rect.x coordinate is changed by this dx variable. Then the same goes for the y coordinates. Now, although I haven't actually added any jumping in, so the y coordinates or dy isn't affected, I need to add this in later. Anyway, so I'm just going to capture both of these at the same time. So the dx and the dy variable are used to update the rectangle x and y position. Now, to make sure I can actually use this, I need to call this move method within the main game loop. So I go back here, I'm drawing my background before I draw the fighters. I'm going to add a section to say move fighters 2. So again, it's just going to be a fighter underscore 1, and now I call the move method. And then I take the fighter underscore 2 and I call the move method so that as well. So if I run this again, I can now move the player notice to both of them move together. So we will address that in a second. But before I add in player 2 control, I'm wanting to complete player 1's control because then I can just copy and paste them and tweak them. So I'm just going to comment out fighter 2 move. This way, fighter 2 just stay where he is and I can move this rectangle around. Instead, there's a few things to fix. So for example, I can go off the screen at the moment. So let's fix that. First of all, to do that, we go back into this fighter class and into the move method, I'm going to be adding a little bit more functionality to it. Here, now first of all, I'm getting to the movement from the A key and D keys, and then I'm just straight away updating the rectangle position based on those variables. So I'm not taking into account that the fact that I might be close to the edge of the screen. So before I actually update these coordinates, I want to check will update and moving the player, resulting me going off the screen. Well, let's add a comment to say ensures player stays on a screen. So first of all, let's look at the left hand side. So we'll say it self.rect. So if the left hand side of the rectangle as it is at the moment, does this dx variable, if this combine those two variables together, if then go off the screen, meaning that if the coordinate is less than 0, well, that means that I don't want to move all that far. So let's say that for example, at the moment, my left hand side of the rectangle is an x coordinate 5 and my dx variable, because I'm trying to move to the left, is negative speed, which is 10, well, minus 5. 10 is going to give me a negative value. So the player is going to go up the screen. If that's the case, then when I want to change this dx variable rather than being a negative 10, I just want it to be whatever the distance is between the edge of the screen and the left hand side of the rectangle. So the edge of the screen is a coordinate 0 and then the left hand side of the rectangle is self.rect.left. Well, you'll know that this is basically the same as just saying minus self.rect.left. So rather than being able to go off to the side of the screen, it's going to go as far as the edge of the, and then stop there. So let's run this and see what's happened. And there we go. So I can go that far, but then I can keep going off this edge of the screen. So I fixed the left hand side, but now we need to fix the right hand side. Now, the logic here is going to be the same. Instead of looking at the left hand side of the player, we're looking at the right hand side. So if we say self.rect right plus the dx variable, if that is greater than the edge of the screen, then we want to stop. But what is the edge of the screen? Well, this is defined by these two variables here, or this one variable here, my screen width. So I say that the is bigger than screen width. Now, note, I'm not using capitals here and I'll explain why in a second. But if this is greater than my screen width, then that means that I'm going to be going off the right hand side of the screen. So I need to make sure that my dx variable is reset to just the gap between the screen width and the right hand side of the player. Now, some of you might notice that this will give me an error and this won't work. The reason is the screen width variable is not defined within this file. Here's the defined here as an initial constant. So what I need to do is pass this variable into the move method. So in here, I put in screen width. So now, I'll take an additional argument within this move method. So rather than just having a self, I also take screen width. So that's why I just type it in the small letters here rather than capitals. If I run this again, I can move to the left and I stop there, and I move to the right and I stop there as well. So that's its player is now restricted to the screen. Next, let's add some jumping for the player. So we go back into the spider class, and for this, I need to add another variable to my constructor. So underneath this rectangle, I'm going to add another one called self.val underscore y, and this is my y velocity. So although I have this dy variable, which is just how much I want to move the player up and down by, I also want to have this velocity, so I know that how player pass is moving up and down. So it's going to be get a little bit confusing at first because I have two variables to control and vertical position, but it'll make sense as I start to add them in. So now, under this movement section, here I will add another comment to say jumping or just jump, and then the key I'm looking for here is the W key. So if key pi game.k underscore W was been pressed, then we set that y velocity underscore y to negative 30. So this is have to be negative value because negative in the y direction moves up the way, I mean a little typo here, val y. So now, underneath, this is on the separate little section, I'm going to update my dy variable. So, dy is increased by self.val underscore y. So now you can see this is essential quite similar to the speed variable. It's just the speed variable I was only using for the x coordinate because moving left and right as a peak speed. But this y variable is going to be changing because it's going to be faster when it's first jump. It's going to be slowed down as gravity takes over. So now if I run this again, I shouldn't get any error. So if I press W now, so the player jumps and goes completely off the screen, and that if I do it again, there we go. So the y velocity is working, the player is now jumping. The problem is there's nothing bringing him back down. Now, what should bring him down is gravity. So gravity is going to be an additional variable that I'm going to put into this move method to act in the opposite direction. Make sure that when it jumps, it's actually come back down. So let's define this variable just underneath speed. I will say gravity is equal, let's say 2. Now I need to actually apply this gravity variable, so I go down here. So well, add a comment say apply gravity, and therefore I go ahead and update the coordinate. I'm going to tweak this y velocity, so I will say that self.val underscore y is increased by the gravity variable. So essentially this y velocity is always going to be brought back down because of the gravity. So if I run this again, you'll notice straight away it's just falls off the screen. So if I start, so that means the third check I need to do add as well as going left of the screen and right of the screen is the bottom of it. I need to make sure that it doesn't fall through this ground here. So we go back into the fighter class and the section where I should ensure the player stays on the screen. Well, so far, we'll look to left and right. So let's take care of the up and down as well. Now, the logic is going to be the same again. It's just I'm looking for the bottom of the rectangle. Now, if I say rect.bottom plus dy, so if we increase it by this dy variable is going to go of the bottom of this floor. Well, the floor is not the entirety of the screen, so I'll say screen height minus 60 pixel of this game window. So if we reach this point and we're about to go off the bottom of the floor, then first of all, I want to make sure that my y velocity is just set to a 0 so that I can keep moving, and then I set my dy variable just a little bit with the dx variable to the difference between screen height minus 60 pixels, so the difference between the floor and the bottom of the rectangle. Now, let's go back into the main code, run this again, and of course, now the screen height variable here is another variable that is not available to this section of code unless I pass it through an argument. So we need to make sure that I do that. Here I add in screen height as a second argument, and within my move method I call screen height. Okay, run rat done again, and there we go. So the player is now sitting on the floor. So this is what I meant by 60 pixels. So this floor here is 60 pixels, and I make sure that the player is always sitting on top of it. So if I jump hill, come straight back down, and I land back into this floor again. He won't go through it now that I want. Set that jump is equal to false. So when we first create the instance of this fighter, he's not jumping. He's not in the jumping state. So this variable is equals to false. I can then go to my jump section down here, then add an additional check to it if the statement. So first of all, we're saying if the jump has been press or the W, then we jump. Well, that's fine, but I also want to be able to only do that if the key press has been pressed and I'm not only currently jumping. So this is where it's going to be avoid this double jump and continuously jump. So we'll add an I statement here and we'll say jump, set that jump is false. So as long as we're not currently jumping, then we can press the W key and we can jump as well. As soon as we have done this, well, we have just jumped, so that means that if this self.jump variable needs to set back to the true. If I go back here again, run it, press W, jump, now I can't do anymore. I can keep jumping, so it did work. The first time it stopped me double jumping, but now I'm glued to the ground, and that's because this jump variable is never reset. So we initially started with it set to false, but that's only when we run this init method. When we first create an instance, that variable is never reset back to the false again. So what I need to do is come down to this section where I'm making sure the player stays on the screen, and I'm checking the other side of the rectangle if he does hit the ground again. So he jumped and he's back down again. The while velocity is 0, will he's no longer jumping either, so the jump variable becomes false. Now we go back here and press W, and then there we go. Now I can just keep jumping and I can keep pressing W, but it will only jump that one time and he'll jump again once he hits the ground. Now at this point you're probably sick of working with these rectangles and you want to start adding in some images. Now before we get into that, although I want to add some of the fighting mechanics, so I start off, I'll look at adding in some attacking. Now in this fighter class, we've got our move section here, which allows me to move left and right as well as jump. Now within here, I'm going to take some more key presses, and this is going to be my attack. So I'll add a comment here to say attack, and I'm going to look for key presses. Now the players will actually have two different attacks, so you can decide if you want the attacks to do different amount of damage, but I just use it for the different attack animation just to kind of add a little bit of variability into the game. So we'll say if key.game k underscore, now I've used J and K for my two attacks for player 1, so it's either arc or key is pygame.k underscore j. If either one of those buttons has been pressed, then an attack has been initiated. So I will call a method for attacking the opposition player, but before I do that, I want to know which of these key presses has been pressed. So right now, I'm just saying if one of or the other has been pressed. Well, I'm going to add an additional if statement inside here. So first of all, the comment to say determine which attack type was used, and then we say if the end again looking at the key presses here. So if key.pygame.k underscore j has been pressed, then it's going to be attack type 1. So say self.attack type is equals to 1, and just repeat this again for my second attack. So if I press k, then attack type is 2. Now you'll notice I haven't declared this variable yet, so I need to make sure that I do that up here. So underneath self.jump, I'll say self.attack type, and I will set this to 0 to begin with. Now to actually initiate the attack from this point, you'll notice I've left this line blank. I'm going to call an attack method. So first I need to create this method. I've got my move method, I've got my draw method. So because the two of them, I will make a new method called attack. So they define attack, will take this argument to self. For now, it will take a couple more, but I'll just leave them for the time being. So we say attacking underscore that rect is equals to pygame rectangle. So note that the R here starts with the capital R. So this rectangle is going to need 4 variables. It will need the x and y coordinates, and then the width and the height. So the x on the coordinates are going to be the player that's throwing the attack. So I can say that the coordinates is self.rect x. No, actually not x, it will be center x because I want it to be thrown from the middle of the player. So center X is the X coordinate. Self.rect Y is the Y coordinate, and then for the width and the height, I can choose how far I want the attack to be thrown. So I'm just going to say 2 times self.rect.width so that the attack is going to be 2 times as wide as the player. Currently is for the height, it will be self.rect.height. So that's going to create a rectangle for me now. Before I go too much further, let's actually see what this looks like. Let's draw this rectangle on the screen. We'll say pygame.draw that. Right now, I'm going to have to do the same thing here with this surface. So I'll need to add it in an argument to say surface, change the color of this to RGB, so 02550, and then the rectangle is going to be attacking underscore rect. So let's just make sure that to avoid any errors, I pass this surface argument in this method. And now I can actually call this attack method, so the moment it's just sitting there, it exists but it's not being called anywhere. So within this attacking section, I need to make sure that I call that method. So we'll say self.attack, and of course it need to take this variable, which is the display surface, the screen. So I'm going to pass that in here. But of course, the move method itself also doesn't have this variable in is here. We just add a screen to this is going to be the surface that gets passes through. If I run this again and I press R, then you can see what I was talking about. You can see this rectangle is now appearing. So this is the attack rectangle, and if I press the K, the exact same thing happens. So the logic here, like I was saying, is that if I'm too close enough to right now, I'm too far away, so this attack won't register. But if I'm about here and throw an attack, well then, enemy is within range. So at this point, I should be able to check for collision between the enemy and this green area here. And as soon as the green area and the enemy collide, well that means that there's been a successful attack, and so the enemy will take damage. So now, let's test this attack out. So I know that I'm creating this attack rectangle here, but I'm not actually doing anything with it yet. So let's just check for the collision now. I'll keep this to draw rectangle underneath because I know it's temporary. So it'll just be a reminder to delete afterwards. So let's check for this collision. We'll say if attack or attacking underscore rect that collide rect. So essentially, this is saying check for rectangular collision between this rectangle and another rectangle. So what's the other rectangle? Well, that's going to be an enemy now. This attack method is going to come to apply to either of those two fighters. So for each one of them, the opposite fighter is the enemy. So that means that this enemy is going to change depending on which player is being controlled right now. So I need to just add a generic variable here, which is going to be my target. So I'll say target, and I need to check for rectangle collision, meaning that it needs to be targeted. Rectangle, so target that rect will what it is target. The target is something that I need to feed through an additional argument to the next surface. We're going to add target, then after the move method up here, we'll be calling this attack in the first place. So we add this target variable, but of course, this target doesn't exist here either. So that's another argument that I need to pass in within the move method. So we'll say target as an argument here, and now when I call the move method from my main game loop, which is here, I can add the target as an argument. So for fighter 1, the target is going to be the other fighter. So it's going to be a fighter 2. And that means that when I later on come back and I call the same code for the fighter 2, the target is here is going to be switched over to fighter 1. So we need an additional variable now. We go back into this fighter class, and right at the top where I've got this attack type, well, just before that, I'm going to add another variable which is going to be self.attacking, and I'll start off by setting this to a false. So this will be a trigger just like my jump trigger. Now we go down into this movement section, and this is where I've got my attacks. Now you could think it will be exactly the same as I did with the jumping, and it would just add it as an extra check here. But actually, I don't want to be able to do any of this movement if there's currently an attacking. So for example, I don't want to be able to attack again if I already attacked, but I also don't want to be able to jump or move. So the idea is that once you start to attack, essentially you're swinging the sword or you're moving the club or something like that. You're in an action already, so you don't want to be able to start an attack and then also run away at the same time. So all of this movement is going to be wrapped up within that same trigger. So that I'll do is before I even start this section, I will add an other comment just to say can only perform other action if not currently attacking, and here we can see if self.attacking is false. Well then, all of this is fine. I can do all of these things as long as I am not currently attacking, but as soon as I've thrown an attack, I can't do any of this stuff again until the attack is complete. So then let's go down to the attack method down here, and as soon as we've thrown at the attack, so it doesn't actually matter if I've been hit the enemy or not. The fact that I've thrown an attack is enough to basically say that I'm now attacking, so I set that trigger is self that attacking to true. Now if I run this code again and I run over to the enemy and try to attack, so you notice it's flash up for a second, this little green rectangle, and then I've recorded a hit. But now nothing else is happening. I keep pressing J, but I can attack again if I've held J. If I once again I just hold the J key, in it only flashes up for a second, so I'm still holding it now, but nothing else is happening. So I can see that the trigger is working correctly. The only things left then is basically health bars. I can just go back into my constructor and just underneath all of this stuff, I'll say self.health is equals to 100, so both of the player will start off with 100 health. Now, when we get a successful attack, rather than printing hit onto the console, we're going to change this, and instead we're going to take the target. So remember, target is what we're feeding here as an argument for the opponent each time will the target health is going to drop by 10. So whenever we hit one of the other enemies, the opposite one loses 10 health. So that's all good, but it would be nice if could actually visualize this on the screen right now. This variable is just stored within each of the individual stances of the fighter class. It would like to create health bars to be able to show the player's health on the screen. Instead, so to do that, I go back into my main game, so my main file, and underneath my draw background function, I will create another purely simple function to be able to draw these two health bars to add a comment to say function for drawing fighter health bars. And I say define draw underscore health underscore bar. So this needs to be take a few variables. First of all is the health. So how much health is the player, still has and an x and y coordinates where I want to draw these two health bars. Now the health bars part is just going to be a rectangle. So let's draw a rectangle on the screen. We'll say by game, that draw, that rec, and the target is going to be the screen now. And the color I want to use, I'll have to go up and define these colors in a second. But I'm just going to type yellow in here, and then rectangle itself is going to be a coordinate x and y, which are those two arguments in the function above. And then the width and the height will say 400 pixels and 330 pixels. Okay, so now let's just go and define the color up here above in here. First of all, so I'll just add a little up section here because I'll have a few different colors to define. So say define colors, and so yellow I just called up as 2550. I guess I could do a couple more while I'm here. So let's say red is 255000, and I will also need white. So let's say white is 255255. So that's my color defined, and I've got a beginning of my health bar function here. So now what's left is actually called this function within my main game loop. So just underneath my background, I'll add the comment to say show player health. Alright, let's say show player stats. So we call the function draw health bar, and then I need to give those arguments. So the first one is going to be a health. Well, I can say fighter 1 that health, because that's now an instance variable, and coordinates are going to be 20 and 20. So that's the x and y, and we can do the same thing for the second fighter. So fighter 2, but his coordinates on the x coordinate anyways, but it's going to be moved over to 580. Okay, so let's run this again, and you can see now I've got these two health bars. So if I go attack this enemy, nothing changes now. The reason for that is because I basically just drawn a solid yellow rectangle. So this rectangle, no matter what the health, is always going to be 400 pixels across. What I need to do is to reduce the width of this rectangle as the enemy health drop. So I know the health of the player starts with the 100, and I know that the health now, so I can just work out a little ratio here, which will ratio is equals to the current health, which is given in this variable here, this argument and the original health, which is 100 if I spell it correctly. So now rather than making it a fixed 400 pixels wide, I can say 400 multiplied by the ratio. Now if for example the current health is 50, then you would say that he's got half of his health, right? Because he started off with 100 health, now he's got a 50 health, so he's down to half health. This ratio should be 0.5, which means that the rectangle, instead of being 400 pixels wide, it will be a 200 pixels. So I'll show this half of his health. So if I want this again, run over attack him this time, you notice it dropped. So it did work. The rectangle with decrease, and it registered the fact that he's lost some health. It's kind of hard to tell though because there's nothing else underneath it. You just need to see the background. So what I want to do is actually layer two rectangles on top of each other. So we go back here. Before we draw the yellow one, we're going to draw a red one underneath. So I'll just say pygame.draw.rec again, and I'll be on the screen now. The color this time is going to be red. Coordinates are going to be X and Y, and this time it's going to be fixed. So this one doesn't change. It run it again, so you can see the red, but it's underneath the yellow one. So I'd like to add a black outlines to it. So there's a couple different ways to do it. I'm going to just to do it the lazy way. I will draw another rectangle underneath so it pack. I'll rather than to just type an arrow again. I will copy the one from here, so I'll draw a black rectangle underneath of all of these ones. But it will be offset, so I'll offset it by 1 pixel to the left and up, and the way and then I will make it 2 pixel wider and 2 pixel taller than the rest of this. Will actually give me an accept. I think I've done something wrong. I maybe just very faint. Okay, this is starting to come together now. We've got mechanics sort of working within it there. However, one issue is that may not have been obvious so far. So when I'm over here and I throw an attack, it's fine. You can see it's flashing up for a second. And on the right hand side of the player, but what if this player is over there? What if I'm on the right side of the enemy and I throw an attack? Well, that attack still come up on the right hand side. So I need to be able to tell which way each player is relative to the other player. One, they need to always be looking at each other. So you can tell that here, of course, because both of them are rectangles, are just rectangles, so you can know it way they're facing. But when they've got images in here and when they got at attack rectangle, we need to make sure that they're always looking at each other. So I need to add another bit of logic. One is to the left of the other and which one is to the right of the other. So we go back into the spider class and add another variable. I'm actually going to do it right at the top for my sort rectangle. Even I'm going to add a variable called set.flip, and I'll begin setting this to false. Now within my move method further down, I got my rect section where I check that the player stays on the screen. Well, just below that, I will add another little section which is going to say ensures player face each other, and this will be fairly simple check. So I already know the x coordinate of the current player because that's going to be whatever set that rec is. And I'm also passing in the target, so I'm always passing in the opponent of each other of the fighter. So I can just compare there because its position, I can say its target that rec dot center x is greater than set that rec dot center x. So basically if the target is over to the right hand side where the player is, well, then we don't need to flip because we're already facing to the right hand side. To self flip means false. Otherwise, we need to flip around. So we'll say flip self that flip becomes true. So I have and once I do have image loaded in this variable, I'm going to control which way these are facing. So that's fine. I know now whether the player is going to be flip or not. However, I can now use this variable within my attack method. So this attacking rectangle that I'm creating is being created at the center of the fighter. Now that's fine if I'm looking to the right hand side, but if I'm facing to the left side, I need to take the exact same rectangle and just need to shape it to the left by the side width of itself. So essentially, I just add in here minus 2 times self dot rect dot width multiply by self dot flip. So when self dot flip is equals to false, this section is going to be 0 out, so this won't apply. But if self dot flip is equals to true, that means that I'm facing to the left, and that's going to offset my attacking rectangle by this amount. So if I was going to back and run this again, what have I done here? I missed of an X here. I made a little typo. So go back again and run this. So if I run over to this side and I attack, it's fine. It's still upper in front of now. If I go over to the other side and attack again, now you notice that attack comes in on the left hand side. So I know that the rectangle are now flipping to face the direction of the enemy and are throwing the attack in the correct orientation. So now that's fighting mechanics are. So now we're to the most of the way we can finally get into the graphics. So I'm going to use sprite sheets to be able to add in the individual images and animations for the both of the players. So I'll just show you how this is currently constructed. Now, within my corp folder or my root folder, I had to assets folder, and in they, I got image. So aside from background and icons, I got the warrior and wizard. Let's get into that. Then first of all, let's load these images in. So we go here. I've got my background image loaded already. So just underneath, I will add another comment say load spreadsheets. And I'll load them both in the same time. So warrior underscore sheet that equals to pygame dot image load. So remember the location here is very important. So I'm going, this is my root folder. So I'm going to assets, image, warrior, sprites, lapu.png. So it's assets, image, warrior, sprites, lapu.png. And then at the end, we just add convert alpha, and now we can copy this, paste it down, and I just want to change lapu to wizard. And change warrior to wizard here as well. Okay, so that's both of the sprite sheets loaded in. Let's just run this and make sure there's no errors. And there is an error straight away. So what have I done wrong here? It says that the file has not been found there. So of course it's a wrong folder, so I should have changed this. So that's an example of kind of error that you would get if there wasn't any issue with the location or the file name or anything like that. So run this again. Okay, that's fine. So the image obviously aren't shown, but I know that I'm loading them incorrectly because I've not thrown any errors. So both of the spreadsheets are now in the game memory. And there's another thing that is important to these spreadsheets, and that's the number of individual frames each of the animation has. So if I open this up again, you can see that this first one, it might be not obvious, but I know that this is the idle animation. And there's 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 frames. So this one has 10 frames. But the rest don't have all the same numbers. So I actually need to know how many frames each of the animation has to be able to know how many of them. So extract. So far, that I'm going to create a couple of lists. So underneath all my spreadsheets loading, I will add another comment to say define number of steps in each animations. So the warrior animation steps is going to be a Python list, and it's just going to be a list of number, and these numbers are going to be a number of frames. So I've already counted them all up, so I know that they are. So it's 10, 8, 1, 7, 7, 3, 7, and I do the exact same thing again for the wizard. So I say wizard animation steps is equals to here. Let's get a little bit less. Actually 8, 8, 1, 8, 8, 3, 7. Okay, yeah. Let's idle back. Then more, I think this might be attacks. So it's kind of mixture. So that's why I had to use different lists for each animation's type, because they have different numbers of frames. Okay, good. So I've loaded the sprite sheets into the memory. I've created this list, but now I need to pass all the information into my fighter class. So when I create this instance, I got my fighter and the x and y coordinates. I need to add additional arguments in here. So the first one is going to be the sprite sheet. So fighter 1 is the warrior, so we'll say warrior and warrior animation steps. And then the second one is the wizards. So it's wizard sheets, or with its sheets and its wizard animation step. So now, let's go over to the fighter class. I'm going to create a new method up here. So just below the constructor, I will create a new method called load image, and it takes the argument of self and then the sprite and the animation step. So we had a little comment here to say extract image from a sprite sheet, and I'll try to build up this up in the stages from the bottom up, because there's quite a few things going on the same time here. So first of all, I bring up this animation spreadsheet here. What I do is move through. If I ignore all these rows, I look to one animation idle. I just want to move through each of the frames, and I want to extract a little rectangle like that. So I'm going to take this one little square like I just showed, and then I need to define the x and y coordinates of this subsurface and the width and height. Well, this first little square, this first one I want here is going to start at 0 and 0, and it's going to go across the width and the height of the image. Now I can take the image of the spreadsheet because that's too big, that's the entirety. So I actually need to define the variable that's going to determine how big each of these squares or each of these frames in the sprite sheets actually are. So we need to go back to the main.py file, and within here actually create a little area where I define some information and some data about the warrior and wizard spreadsheet. So just below the colors, here I will add a section to say define fighter variables, and for now, I think I just need to want to start with I don't want to add too much at once. So say warrior size is 162 pixels. Now I know that that's how big each of the square. It's 162 by 162. I simply extract that from the individual spreadsheets, so I know that that's how big when the artist drew this. That's just how big they made the individual frames. And in fact, you can kind of see that at the bottom right, the image is 1620 wide, then 10 frames, or and I can do the same thing for the wizard while I'm at it. So I'll say wizard size, it's actually bigger, so they're not the same. And this one is 250 pixels. Now over time, I am going to come back and add more of these individual things in here. But for now, I don't want to overload it. So what I'm going to do is create a list called warrior data. And for now, this list is only going to contain one thing, which is the warrior size. Later on, as we add more information, this list will grow, but for now, it's just the one thing. So I might seem a little bit silly while I'm creating a list of one item, but that's the reason. So wizard data is list which just contains the wizard size for now. So now, if we go back down to where I am creating an instance of fighter before I pass in the spreadsheets, I will pass in the data. So I'll pass in warrior data and wizard data. And the reason I kind of compress it or combine them into a list, so that's I pass in one thing, because otherwise this, as I add more and more things to this line, this is going to get really long. So warrior data and wizard data will store a few different things over time. So for now, that's going to give me a size. So there's going to come in through this constructor method here. So I just need to add the argument in here to capture them. So after X and Y, we have data. So that's the warrior or wizard data. So we also have the spreadsheets being passed in the animation step. So we can extract this information and store in within these self variables. Here, so there's one, we can say self.size is equals to data. Remember that data was on a list. So if I just go into index 0, that's going to give me the first and the moment and the only item, which is the size of the image. So now I can go back to this load image method and continue developing it. So where we left off was that I have the interior here that's going through each of the steps in a given animation. So this variable will change eventually. But for now, let's just assume that it's a first animation. So it's idle animation. So it's going to go over 10 animation steps, and it's going to take a little squares out of it. It's going to take this temporary image of a surface. Now I want this to start at 0, 0, and I want to be self.size width and self.size height, because I know that it's that's correctly self.size for both. Yes, of course, because that variable is same for both width and height as a square. So it's going to be 162 pixels wide and 162 tall pixels in the case of the warrior, and I'll be 258 250 in the case of wizard. Okay, so that's fine. It extracted the image, but now I need to store that image in the list. So before I even get into the loop, I'm going to create a temporary image list, and I'll set that to an empty list. So once I extract the image, I can store it into the list. A contemp image dot underscore list dot append that, and what I am appending, well, it's just the temporary image, and I just pull out. So by the end of the loop, I will have gone through each of these 10 image. I will pull down a rectangle from each one, and I will create a list out of it. However, you might have noticed a little problem here, which is that I'm starting each of this subsurface, each of this little square at 0, 0 coordinates. So actually, all 10 of my image are going to just be the first slides here. And what I need to do is change the x coordinate and each iteration of the loop. So what I need to do actually change this this x variable with each iteration. So rather than having this underscore here, which meant that I didn't care about the iteratable, I actually want to add a variable here. So I'm going to say for x, in the range of animation, I want to take this temporary image at the coordinates of the x multiplied by that self size. So now it's going to move along the row, because each iteration the x variable increase, so it's moved us on the next square along. So that's going to get us halfway there. That's going to extract one individual row. So we'll get into the first one, and then we're done because of the loop ends after we've done this first animation. So what I need to do now is expand that loop. So that's Once we go through all the x values in the first row, we then move to the next one and then the next one, next one, next one. So we actually need to move down the way as well as across the way. So I'm going to the nest this individual loop that I've already got the moment inside another for loop. So here we're going to say for information in animation step. So remember animation steps is on the list that I previously passed through. So animation steps tells me how many frames are each sequence of the animation. So 10 and ideal 8 and whatever the next one is and so on. And so for now, if I just indent all of this, and it means I'm going to be iterating through that, and I will repeating this process for the row and animation list. However, the problem is that when I take this rectangle with the section, here remember the surface I have added in the variable for the x coordinate. But now, for the y, so this is still taken from the top, so I need to add something similar to this for going vertically up and down this sprite, and that's going to come from this first for loop because of the nested loop. One inside the left and right for this loop is one that's going to control each of the animation. So it's going to move down through the list. So what I'm going to do here is add a second variable, the for, let's say, for y comma animation in enumerate and animation steps. So initially, now it is placed for the for loop to in animation. It's going to each animation steps, and that's going to be fed into my next animation. But this y variable is going to type to enumerate, and enumerate basically just means it's ignored the data that inside it and it's just kind of like having a tracker, something that tracks how many times we've run through the animation. It's going to start with 0, and then every time we go through this loop, this y variable is going to increase by 1. So if I wanted to increase instead of this, I could do something like this, just keep it as it is without the enumerate, and just have y equals 0, and then each time the animation is complete, I say y is increased by 1. So I could do that. This is why that's a neater way to do doing the same process. So we add y in here and we enumerate this section. So now that I have y enumeration variable for down moving down and list, I need to add that in here. So instead of my 0, say y multiplied by self dot size. Now the last thing I do left to do is to have master animation list. So right now I got this temporary image list, and this essentially just extracts the image in the row. But once that's done, it move on to the next row and the overrides it, so it is the list of the rights of all of that in. So I need to have one overall list that's going to track all of the animations going across the way as well as going down the way. So right at the beginning here, I will create another list called animation list, and it'll empty list, so that by the end of this each of list for loops. So when this linear for loop is done, then I take my overall animation list and I append the temporary list into it. So I need to make sure the indentation here is exactly as I got in here. So this for loop, the one that nested is completely for one run, it produce a finalized temporary image list, and one then that's done. That essentially saying that's the image list will have one row's worth of image inside. So we take that one row's worth of image, we add it in the next line up into the master animation list, and then we repeat the process, but we move down one row. So then we move on to the next one, grab all of this image, add it to the master animation list, move on to the next line. So by the end of it, I have one master list that one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows containing, or rather 7 individual lists containing each of their animations steps. So of course, once all this done, I need to actually get this information back out. So we close this method. So just unindented that correctly by saying return animation list. So finally, I need to actually call this method. So I created it, but I'm not actually calling anywhere. I'm going to call it from the constructor itself. So as soon as I created a pattern, whether it's warrior or wizard, I call this method on it. Make sure that I create this animation list on. So it's, let's say underneath this flip will say self.animation list is equal to self.load underscore image, and then I can give it an argument that it needs a spreadsheet. So basically take the spreadsheet, take the number of animation steps, and then give me back the list of containing all of that information. So I hope that makes sense. It's a tricky concept to explain, but let's see if we can actually run it, and if it works first time. If I get an error, it's okay. So there's no error, which suggests that everything been run successfully. I haven't seen it yet because I'm not deleting any of this image. But let's just see if I can print out this. It would have to be inside if I print out this animation list and just see what it actually looks like to help visualize what's going on. Okay, so I don't know if that's going to help a whole a lot. Probably not. So this is basically just all that say service is just a bunch of those individuals images, so you can see that, for example, 162 by 162, that's a coordinate that fit it. So it's basically saying that within that massive list, if I go to the top where starting off with a list and inside the list is another sub-list that contains all of these items, I should have an end here. So that one list, so that here there is the little animation. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 individual surfaces within that first list, and then we go on to the next one. So then come to the next animation and go on. Every time you see one of these square brackets that starts and end of the list, so this actually showing a bit crudely what it is that we've just achieved, which is that we've created one big list that I has a whole bunch of individuals list inside it that have all of those images. Okay, so we finally loaded all of the data in this image are stored now that we can actually do this. How do we do show this image on the screen? So we're going to be few more variables to add into this construction. First of all, underneath the animation list, I'll add another one, and that's going to be called set.action, and this action is going to determine that what the player is currently doing so that we know which animation sequence to show. Is he attacking? Is he just idle? Is he running? Died? So we'll just set an action to 0 to begin with. And I'll add a little comment here, just I'll copy it across from my snippet. So explain what these are going to be tied into a 0. It's going to be idle 1 with run, jump, attack 1, attack 2, hit, and that's all. This how I'm going to determine which animation is going to be run. I'll just change the action, and soon as I do that, it's going to run a different animation. So we have that variable, and then I need another variable which called frame index. So I'll explain this one when I come to use it. And then lastly, I need self-image. So self-image, that image is going to be taken from this animation list. So this is where I'm finally saying what I'm image I actually want to show on the screen. So I know that I need to take it from animation list, and the animation list is a container of list. So the first index is going to always be which animation sequence I'm in. Well, I just explained that that's determined by the action. So then when I determine which action I'm in, I need to know, okay, well, which frame of the action I'm in. So if I say that I am in the idle animation, I am halfway through it, I at the end of it, I am the start of it. I will because we're just loading it. Oops, I need to close this down. Because we're just loading the first image, I want to start the animation right at the beginning. That's what this frame index is for. So I'm going to start it at set that frame that index, which is 0 as the frame index variable is increased. We run through the animation onto the next image, and so on. Okay, so now, for the moment of put, let's go down to the draw method, and we've got this rectangle in here at the moment. So we'll keep the rectangle where it is. But on the top of the rectangle, I'm going to draw the actual image. So say surface image, it's actually not a screen within this code because I'm feeding in surface as an argument in here. Say surface.lit. What I'm splitting, well, it's going to be the self image or the self that image. Then I need to give it the coordinates. So the x coordinate is going to be at my rectangle position. So self that rect x, and then the y coordinate is self that rect that y. This is going to go look very pretty to begin with, but let's see if we can add at least get something on the screen. Okay, there's we go, got it. This tiny little wizards thing here kind of floating in, and then they will say, no, that's the wizard over there. We've got the warrior over here, and they're both in the wrong place. They're relative to the rectangle. They're in the wrong place. They're too small, and so on. But we've got finally onto the image loaded. So there's a few things to fix there, but at least now that there's image loaded. So we can fix them one by one. First of all, let's get rid of this print statement because it's just filling up this nonsense. So let's get rid of this. And we can go back to the main file. Now remember, I said this warrior data and wizard data list are going to expand over time. So next scale, so we'll say wizard snow should be a warrior first warrior scale. It's going to be a 4 wizard scale. It's going to be a 3, and the reason is, remember, the warrior and the wizard have different image size. So when I scale them up, already they're too big, and sorry, already their size different sizes when I load the game. And that's normal, you can see. This guy is quite small, and the wizard is a little bit bigger than this guy. So I can scale them by the same amount I need to give them different scale values to get them to come up around at the same size. So now I just need to add this within my data. So we'll add a warrior scale here, and we'll add wizard scale as the second variable within this list. Okay, so don't need to change anything on this side because that warrior data is being fed it was, but I just wanted to extract a little bit more data within a constructor. So now I can add a second one here. So say set.image underscore source scale that equal to the data 1. So index 1 is going to take that second pointer from the data list. So now that I have an individual scale for each one of them, I go back to this load image method, and where I'm loading my temp image, I'm not going to put it straight into the temporary list as it's going to load that image back. Then I'm going to scale it up a little bit accordingly to this section. There's going to change, so now it's going to say that I'll type it about out above first, and I'll just copy and paste it. So it's just going to say Pygame, that transform, that scale, what I'm scaling. Oh, it's a temporary image. And that I just extracted, and now I need to give a new X and Y width. Sorry, I need to give it a width and a height. So the width is going to be a sat size, which I'm already given as a variable multiplied by self.image scale. And then the Y, or rather the height of it, is going to be, well, it's going to be the exact same as it's the square. So we can put that in the next. So it's just make sure I close brackets correctly. There's one more, so if I know. Now, take this line, I'm just typing out not temporarily, and I put it in here. Then what's going to putting into my list is a scaled up version of this image. So let's just run this again and see what's going on. Okay, we go the image definitely bigger and scale the size of the screen. And now, so this word of wizard is completely disappeared. But I know the image size are now correct. So the next thing I want to do add is some kind of offset to be able to move this guy back into position and to be positioned pretty much where the rectangles are. So we go back into the main file, and where I got my skills is going to be add another variable here. So this will be a warrior offset, and this offset is going to be a list because it's going to contain X and Y value. So this is just how many pixels I wrote out. I need to offset the image by the make them kind of sit in the right place. So it's just trial and error. I know that these are the correct values now, but if you were to change the scale of these things, if you were to kind of change the screen size, this would be off. So you would have to play around with this number of the get it to the right place again. So we just need to pass that back into the warrior data, and then I repeat the process below the wizard. So we say wizard offset equals to these values are a little bit different, and we pass that to our last variables. Okay, so that's, I don't think there's anything else to add to this warrior data and the dated this. But now I can extract the information on the back here though. My fighter class, so underneath this one, just to keep it all kind in place, I'll say self that offset is equals to data 2. So now I've been able to process or extract all the information from that list. Individuals, variables assigned to the character class or fighter class. Now finally, if we go back to the draw method down here, instead of just drawing the image as is directly onto the screen, I need to play around with these X and Y variables based on the offset. So now, I take this rectangle X coordinates just as before because that's the part of it's correct. But then, I add a little offset to it. I want to minus that offset 0, which is the X of my offset. Multiply by self.image scale, because of course, that's going to change depending on how big or small I want the image to be. So that's the X coordinate. And then I do exact same thing for the Y coordinate, but for the offset, I take index 1 multiplied by the self.image scale. And let's just see I've got through the right number of brackets. So now, I should be able to run this and get the correct size image in the correct place. And there we go. Okay, image are loaded incorrectly. We've got them standing, they're facing the wrong way, and they're not animating, but we'll deal that with the next for now. We can see that they're in the right place, and I can actually move this guy around and I can still attack this other guy. First of all, to fix the fact that they're not facing each other properly, so this guy is facing the wizard, but he's facing the wrong way. And if I move past him, he doesn't look around. Well, remember, we've kind of already addressed this previously, where I had this that variable. So all I need to do is now is just use this variable within my draw method, and I just need to add one little extra step here. So before I do anything onto the next screen, I'm going to create a page that I'm going to use to put onto the e-screen, and I'm going to click the original. So we'll say image is equals to pygame that transform that clip what I'm flipping. Well, it's actual image, so it's set that image, which is what I was previously just putting directly onto the screen. I take that image and then I need to decide whether I want to flip it on the X or Y axis. Well, I want to flip the left and right, so it's the first variable is set that flip. The second variable is always false, so I don't want to flip them up and down the way just left and right. So that's, I suppose it's around the Y axis, up and down the way no left and right. But it's around Y axis, so now I'm going to have to flip image, which means rather than flipping the self image, variable, I'm actually going to delete this new image, which is the flip one. If I run this again, now this guy is facing him and he is not facing the right way. But that's because I'm not calling this move method. If I run past him, my warrior flips around. So the warrior is always flipping around. And the correct way the wizard sees and end, that's simple. Because I'm not calling this move method yet. So the code for a logic for flipping this guy around is handled within the move method. But since I'm not moving him, that part of the code doesn't get run now. Here are going to be other instances where the move method aren't being run. So for example, when there's intro sequence to the game, and that means that when I first run the game, this guy is going to be facing the wrong way. So I want to overcome that. I want to make sure that this opter start off facing to the left. He wants to start facing the warrior right. From the beginning, and to do that, if we go back into this fighter class, remember, right at the start, I had said that flip is equals to false. Well, that's not necessarily true, right? Because it's only true for the warrior, but the wizard is supposed to flip around, so I'm going to add an extra argument within this class. So after my x and y coordinates in here, I'm going to add another one, which is flip. So now, rather than saying set that flip equals to false, I say that it's just equals to flip. So whatever I put in here is going to be default value to the wizard. Well, the wizard is okay. Well, set false as before. Nothing changes. And there's sorry wrong around the warrior is okay, nothing changes. There, but the wizard does need to flip around right from the beginning. So if I run this again, now he's facing the correct way. He's still going to turn when I go past him because he's not running his move method. But this guy is so low that the code is working correctly. Now, let's move on to the sprite animation. Okay, so now I think we pretty much got everything in place to start working on animation. So like I explained, when I was going over the spreadsheet, the animation is going to be the sequence of individual images, which we've already got. We've already stored them in a list. We just need to play them one after another. So we need to some kind of timer that's going to allow us to play one image. So say half a second, and then move on to the next one, so on and so on. So let's go into the Let's Fighter class and add this timer into it. So under lit, where I will define our image, I'm going to set that update underscore time is equals to pygame.time, so that get underscore ticks. So this is just going to measure the time when this fighter was created. It's like taking a timestamp at that instance. Now underneath the move method, we're going to create another new method. Here, this is where I'm going to handle the animation and a couple of other things. So I'm just going to call this an update method. So I say handle animation updates, say define updates, doesn't need any argument except for self. So this update method is always going to updating the current image. So it's going to determine which image of the frame or the animation we're going to show on the screen. Now we already know how to do this self that image is taken from the set animation list, and it's based on the burst of all the action and the frame index. So that means that's all you need to be doing is increasing this frame index, and animation is going to be run by itself. So let's add some kind of timer. So some kind of cooldown for this. I'll say animation cooldown is equals to, let's say, 500. So this is milliseconds. So each animation frame is going to take half a second. Once that time has run out, we'll move on to the next one. So let's make that check. Let's say if I game that time get tick, so measure the current time. Right now, in fact, let's add a little note at the start, just explain what's going on. Here, so we say check if enough time has passed since the last update. At the moment, here as well, just to explain all of this stuff. So update image, okay. So we update the image. So how do we check if enough time is passed? We will get that current time and then we take it away from the last time. We updated now, remember these variables currently created right at the start in the constructor to this update time in the record then as soon as we create the instance. So from that point, if the current time minus that time when it's first created, it's greater than animation cooldown. So if a half a second is already passed, well then let's just move on to the next frame index. So let's frame index increase by 1, but we need to make sure that we set timer and set that update is currently time by game. That time don't get underscore ticks. Now to start this should be enough to get animation working. So let's go back run this code and see what's happening. Going to, it wasn't enough. So what I missed, well, I missed something pretty obvious. Actually, I never called this update method anywhere, so I created it and I will define it, but I'm not calling on the game loop. So we got back here and let's see where do I put this. I'll put it above the draw method. So I want to make sure that I get the latest image from the animation first, and then I draw it. So let's say update fighters, and I'll just copy this put after, and I'll just say instead of draw this change to update, and it doesn't need to get argument would move screen so that update and nothing else. Okay, let's run this again, and we're going to actually see that we're moving. Those are now there's burgers, no observation, and I get an error. So let's start that again. Let's run through the kind of animations happening. Let's look at the ends of animation and get an error. Now the error says less index is out of the range. So what's actually happening here is through this animation frame index is increasing by 1 every time. We get it to the end, also we try to load the next frame. So we get here and we lose. Then try to load the next one where nothing there, it doesn't exist. So that's throw an error. So what we need to do is return that animation back to start. In the case, so underneath this code and code is fine, we'll leave it as is. We'll add another section that says check if the animation has finished or set that frame index that we're trying to access next because we've just increased it. And we're moving on to the next index that doesn't exist, meaning that's greater than equal to current length of the list. So set that animation is list at set action, subtraction. So basically, we're saying that it's animation index or the frame index that we're going to try and access to the next iteration of this if that's gone beyond the actual length or the number of individual frames within this list. Well, then can't really access it is going to prompt for error. If that's happened, then it means we've gone to the end of the animation already. So we just need to go back to the start and start the whole thing again. So set the frame index just become 0, and then this we keep continuous loop. Going to every time we get into the end of animation, this section we trigger and we go back to the beginning. Again, we run the whole thing. So let's try it again. It's gonna make loop up and down, and then it should just keep going in actually doing speed up animation. I deliberately left it quite slow just to make it a little bit more obvious when it came to the end. It was going to set something like 50. It's just going to be a lot smoother now. It actually looks like a little animation. They're just standing, they're bobbing up and down. Now, of course, there's nothing happening when I move. It's always just in the idle animation. Even when I attack, it's just an idle animation. Doesn't do anything else apart from that. But now, the core of the animation process and all the images are set up. It's actually not difficult to add more into them because I know that's they're already there. And I loaded them, and all I need is to do is change the self.action variable. So as soon as I changed it to something else, I'm going to run a different animation. So let's add in a running animation. Now, let's make sure it's work and smoothly. I do need to add a couple of additional trigger. So just under this bell underscore y variable, I will say self.running is equals to false. So we'll begin a non-running state, and then we go down to the move method here. So that's whenever I move left and right, I also trigger variable. So I'll say self.running is now equal to 2. So as soon as I hold one of this key down or press them down, I will go into a running state. But when I release them, I want to go back into a non-running state. So I want this variable to be able to false as soon as I'm not pressing either a key. So could add another if statement, but what I'll actually do instead is just reset that variable right at the startup. So here, where I'm resetting or initially defining some variables, I will say that self.running is equals to false. So essentially, it's going to start off in a false condition. If I press one of this key to move left and right, will set to true, but the next iteration is always going to come back to the false. And if I'm not holding this button down, then it will never trigger. So now we can use this if we go into my update method. And I did say that here I'm going to handle animations as well as a couple of other things. So the other things I check what action the player is performing. So this is how we're going to determine the animation sequence. So run, it's here, would you say is set.running, which is that variable I just created that trigger. If that is equals to true, well then set that animation, set that action becomes 1. Remember, that's kind of just how I set them up from the spreadsheet. So this bit here is this notes explains what each of the numbers relates to, and it's just the way the spreadsheet is structured. So 0 is idle, but the 1 is running, so they just correlate to the constructor of that sheet. Now, if we go back and run this, and I move now, you notice it works straight away. So I'm now running. However, as soon as I stop, I'm still running. So there's a little bit of an issue to figure out there. But I see that animation is working correctly. So what I want to do is go back into this update method and just expand to the vertical section. You're going to the crow, and we add more and more actions in, but basically, I'm saying that set that running is true, then the action becomes 1, but the actions never go back to 0, which is remember idle. So what I need to do here is add an else statement. So if running that set is not true, well, set that action becomes 0. So let's run this again, and then another one, and now I should be able to run. It stopped and wasn't expecting it to happen straight away, but I can explain what's happened. So it's kind of working. Now, you can see what I'm able to run idle, but throwing an error every now and again. I'm not immediately obvious why this error is happening. However, the problem is there's different number of animation frames between these two sequences. So this one has 10 idle, but running has only got 8. So what happens is that if I'm in my idle state and I'm at frame index 9, and I will change my animation to the next one, is this doesn't have 9 frame. So it tries to access that index, not there, it throws an error. So I need to be a little bit smarter with this update section. Here, I can just click the animation or the action of the different numbers and it takes it to work because I need to look at the frame index as well. I'm actually going to create a little one. Helper a function here. So, it's going to be another method. I'm just going to put it and end near the draw method. It's going to be quite simple and small method. So we'll say depth update action and itself, and what its take is new action and argument. So now rather than changing my accept that action variable, I'm just going actually to feed it through into this method, and I'm going to put action in here, and we'll do a little check. So I'll check if the new action is different to the previous one. So that's just an if statement, if new action which has just been fed into the different to the current one. So if I self direction does not equal a current self action, then that's fine. Then we can just set self that action to the new action. So this section of codes actually is not really that different. So what I'm already doing here, right? I'm basically just here, I'm a bit more explicit, just saying, okay, make it action 1 here. There's an additional check. First of all, I'm saying I'm already running or I am already idle. And I'm then we don't need to do anything but it I'm not, then that's fine. Let's change to action that's being requested. But here's the important step. I need to update the animation settings. So I need to reset the frame index. So we can just go from idle to run halfway through the animation. If we go to from idle to run, that's fine, but we need to start running from index 0. We also need to check when it's the last updated. Well, we've just changed the animation. That means that the update time is right now. So if I give that time, don't get underscore tick. Okay, and that's it. That's this helper function or method created. So now I can actually call this rather than doing this directly. So instead of set that action equals 1, we say the set that update that action, and the argument is going to be 1 and down. Here is going to be update action. So now if 0 run this again, you won't really notice a difference, but the error is gone. So as soon as you stop one animation, just click into the other and it begins it from the start. Okay, so let's keep this going and add more animation. So the next one to do is the jumping animation. We'll go back to this fighter, and I think all the triggers I need are already here. So I already got this jump variable which is going to be affected by this W key. So as soon as I press W, I jump, and this variable gets the set through. So should actually be able to just use the directly within this update section up here, and we're going to add in above the running check. So we'll say itself that jump is equals to true, then we update the action. Then this action is going to be number 2, and you need to make sure that this is an elite. Now the sequence of this is important, and you can kind of play around with them, doing them different orders, and you will see why. But it does kind of affect how the animation are structured. So if I run this again, so I can run around and that's fine. I can jump now. You can see that's the little just puts his knee up and the little jumping animation, and as I jump over him, he still flips around, so this back and forth flipping. When I move to the other side of the enemy, it still working correctly. Okay, so that's a couple more, that's a couple animation added in. So now let's do the same thing for attacking. Now again, I should have most of the variables defined. So I've got this set that attacking trigger, and my attack type is set to 0. And then within this move section, I set my attack type. Now I've just noticed there's actually something that I've missed here, which is that I'm not resetting the self attack type to anything. So it should do is just I'm done with running. I need to make sure that I do set that attack type is equals to 0. So we won't have noticed the problem with this because I don't have an attack animation. So yet, as I add it, this may become a problem. So let's just make sure that it always starts off as well. Well, nothing to do attack. And then once I press either the J or the K keys, it defines which kind of attack I'm doing. So then we go into this update method again, and just about all this stuff, we need to add additional check. So now if we say self that attacking is equals to true, so now you can kind of see of this trigger now coming is useful because it's effectively just defining what the player is doing, what state he's in, and then I can choose this to control the animation and control a few other things. So it's set that attacking is true, that's fine, but remember there's 2 different actions because there's a different attack. So the attack is, there's this attack 1 and attack 2, and then there's also attack which is also 2. So I need to define which one is currently in. So I know which animation to run, where the self that attack type comes into the self that attack underscore type is equals to 1. So that the first attack will say self that attack that action 2, otherwise it's 3. Or if self that I just copy this down, no point typing all that again. So if we are doing that other attack, self that attack type 2, then the animation action is going to be 4. And just remember, then this becomes an if. So we can have 2 ifs in a row like that. It will work if it won't give you an error, but will mess up the way of the code is working. Now, actually, what I'm going to do here is just because it's going to get a little confusing with all of this, I'm just going to add these little hints back. So, run this 3 up. So, there's 3 attack. Attack 1 and then attack 4 is attack 2. So, just means at the glance, I don't have to go back and forth. I can just see what these are meant to be. Okay, so let's try this and let's see what happened at this attack. So, okay, it's run attack animation and then he's just kind of going crazy. He just keep attacking with the same animation. Now, the reason for that mainly is because we have this self-attacking variable which is set to true but it never backs to false, and I deliberately left that previously. So when I was working on the attacking code down here, I remember I set the attack variable to true, created an attack rectangle, and then I stopped more attacking, which is created as a result. I never reset this variable back to false at the time that because I want to use the animation to be able to do that. So the idea is that when the animation is complete, normally, then we're looking to animation. Here we just reset back to the 0. We just reset the frame back to the how it was, and well, that is what's happening, right? He's throwing an attack, it's finishing, and then he's just keep doing it over and over. So the attack, what I want to do is the animation finish. With the animation is attack, we go back to the idle, we don't just keep attacking, so we don't need keep resetting back to the start. So that's actually where I'm going to be checking or changing this attack trigger. But back to false, so I need to attack a leader with logic with the animation seconds. Section here, so I'll just add a note here. First, I'll check if attack was executed, so it means that we've executed an attack, but we've also come to the end an animation. We finished this attack animation, so if self that action is equals to 3, or self that action is equals to 4, then I can reset the variable. I can set back to the false. So now if I go back, I should be able to run this again and do it that attack and any stop. So the end of the attack, that's all over, and now I can actually keep throwing more attacks. So if I can go over here and then just starting laying to this dude, and there you can go animation for that working slowly. Problem is I can just kind of sit here and just hold the attack button, or I can just keep spamming it where no break between an attack. There's no cooldown for it. It's which is, I don't know, I think it's a bit more of the challenge, a bit more strategy in the game if another player had a little bit of cooldown. After he swing his sword, or after you throw an attack, so let's add a little bit cooldown here. So we go back into the Python class and right at top where creating, so you can see there's quite a lot of these variables. Now you need to add more underneath attack type, and this is going to be set that attack cooldown. It's begins with 0, so this is just by dividing the variable, so we can just go and use it later on without throwing any errors. And now we can go back to the update section and animation. We updated here where we said if the frame if this animation are finished, and then through with an attack we end that animation, so the attack's over and the same at time. We want to set up cooldown, so now this attack's finished, so let's do 20, let's go with 50. Well, now I need to actually make sure this attack cooldown prevent me from throwing more attacks, so this attack method is right below. There's no trigger on, and it's no check against this attack cooldown. So that's what I need to add in here, and I have to add in the secret. First of all, this says this that attack cooldown is 0, then we're fine, and we can all this code underneath. We can indent all these steps and keep this as well as now with our indent that I'll delete this rectangle eventually. But just the issue, just going to be running this again, I'll be able to do when the first attack, and then I'm going to get the cooldown. So this cooldown, which is stopping me from throwing more attacks, that means that I need to make sure that I'm actually counting this cooldown down. So we go back to my move method, and there's so ensure players facing each other. Just underneath that, let's add this little cooldown, apply cooldown, and I'll say set that attack cooldown is greater than 0, which has been set to 50, and then just subtract one of the cooldown, reduce by 1, so it is going to give me a little timer. It's not using the actual time. I could do that, use time instead. But I guess it doesn't really matter too much, so this is just going to give me some kind of cooldown that stop the player attacking over and over again. If I run again and just keep hitting J, you can see there's a little bit of delay. So I'm holding J right now with a slight delay between the attack, and if I press holding K, you can see changing the different types of attack. So but of attack types are working, and actually this cooldown may be a little too long. Let's place it back to 20. Okay, so let's keep going with the animation and get the first 5 and done. So there's the hit animation. So this is when one of the enemies attack the other, and the one that's being attacked takes a little hit. So there's a 3 frames here just to show that. So let's add that in again, and this is going to be need another trigger. So we're going back to the top here, and we should be put this underneath attack cooldown will say set that hit is equals to false. So it starts offset is false, and then as soon as there's an attack that successfully hit, we'll set that triggers to true. So we go back into the update, and again it's just the same process. Now you'll see the familiar is equals to self equals to true, and then action update to action update 5. Add a little comment say 5 means hit, and just change that to L8. So let's see if actually that's not gonna work straight. Anyway, because we're never changing the variable, that's triggers true. So we could come this and blah blah blah. Successfully attack the target, health is reduced by 10, and target's his variable is also true. So it means that we hit the target and should now run through the hit animation. So we run through if I go over hit the Skype. So, okay, so it worked and it didn't work. So you can see that he's just a little bit crazy with, I don't know what he's doing, but basically he's just running through it. The hit animation constantly, and that's because not resetting it to the hit animation. So the animation finish and can skip going into the loop. I need to do the same thing as I did with the attack animation. So when they come to the end, they need to snap out of them going back to the idle mode. I did also notice there's through that animation, we're all running a little bit hyperspeed, and the reason for that is because when I was messing around with the attack animation, I changed the wrong cooldown, so I changed my animation cooldown from 50 to 20, but actually, I was trying to change the attack cooldown from 50 to 20, so that should be animation, yeah, it's a little bit more normal, well, they were a little bit hyper there. Okay, so now we just need to go back to the section that I'm, right now, we're looking at the end of animation, so I'm just saying that we come to the end of sequence first of all, we check where we are attacking. If yes, then we attack stopping, and we go back to the idle, and then let's check if damage was taken. So then I just say if self that attack ocean is equal to 5, which means that the well itself has been hit, then I need to reset that self that hit variable. I need to set the trigger back to the fall so that we can send this action so animation that. But there is also other things to add here, and it's difficult to demonstrate. It's just a bug that I noticed when I was making this game. If one player attack and the other player attack at the same time, the attack should essentially stop right. One attack cancels out the other. So within this section, here I need to add another little check if I say the players attack and stop. So that means that the animation for hitting or for being hit has been finished. Then self that attacking is also set to false, and that attack cooldown of self attack cooldown is also reset to back to 20. Okay, so now let's see if this animation works better. If I go over and attack this guy, he takes a hit and then he comes back down to the idle animation, so that's working correctly. I don't have the controls for the wizard yet, so I can never really demonstrate it to the warrior, but I know that it's going to be working the same way animation are loaded to pretty much in the same process. Now, there should be a one final animation to add, and that's a death animation software. The players runs down to the complete to the 0. They need to go through the death animation software. That I'll add one more triggers, which is self that alive, but I will put it underneath health because it's kind of makes more sense to be under that set that life is equals to true. So when they first start off, they leave obviously, and then we need to make sure that we set that false when the health runs out. So we can do that again with the update section. So just above here, taking my hit, I'll say set that health is less than or equal to 0. Then well, set that health just becomes to 0 if I don't think there's really a scenario where it could end up to a negative health because I'm reducing it by 10 every time. But if you change the variable and do 15 damage instead of 10, it's possible you run to the below 0. So let's just make sure that the health bar doesn't go up of the scale basically, and set that live is also set to false. There's no longer alive. So lastly, we need to make sure that the action to set to the correct animation. So number 6 is the final one, and that is death. And remember to set this to an elite. So I guess I could have done them in a opposite order, but the animation does work. And in the other way around, so we start with the latest animation and work back down to the idle, making sure that if at each one of let's run this out again, and actually it's going to take a while to kill him. So let's just drop his health down to 10 to begin with. Instead of 100, so that's as soon as I attack him, and you'll notice the health bars response flatly. So they're already showing the correct amount of health. If I attack him, he's dead. Health bars going to 0, and that is running his death animation. But yes, as with the attack and hit animation, he got stuck in the loop. It's just keep and running that one death animation in a little bit different, right? Because when he finished that death animation, I don't want him to just stand back up and continue idling. He actually needs to stop at the last frame. He needs to lay down and well just to be dead. So that's what we need to do with this update method. So before I automatically reset the frame index to 0 and go into this checks, I'm actually going to add another check. So first of all, we say that if the frame index is gone to the end of the list, right? So we come to the end of the animation, we'll first check if the player is dead, or rather if the player is dead, then end of the animation. So we say the set that live is equals to false, therefore players died. Well, the frame index doesn't go back to the start frame index, actually just becomes the last frame in the list of then let that self that animation, list self direction. And I need to subtract 1 from here, so that's going to give me the last frame. So that's fine, but otherwise, so else we do everything else just as we had previously. So let's go over and stab this guy again. This is die, and that's it. The ground and this animation is finished, so that's pretty much it. That's I think all the animations working correctly and loaded in. I haven't got his attack animation from the wizard, but from the fact that he's idling, dying and taking hits correctly, it should be all work fine when I do all that in as well. But now that all of the mechanics and the animation are pretty much in the place, there's nothing really stopping me from adding the second player. So I can control player 1, I can move them around, but I've got nothing for player 2 yet. Now because I've already set that out, I can just copy and paste it and just pick up your values. So we go back into this fighter class here, which has grown quite a bit, and let's see it's within this section. Here, basically, this movement section, I need to duplicate this and add additional controls for the other players. But first, I need to know which players I'm controlling. So, actually, this class is going to need an additional argument here. So, your first argument just after self is going to be the player and is going to be tell me this player 1 or this is player 2. So, then I'm beginning here. We say self that player is equals to player, and I will feed this argument in from the main code here. So when we create fighter 1 and the fighter 2, before I define the x and y coordinates, I'm going to say player 1 and this is player 1 and fighter 2 is player 2. So now with that argument created, I can use that to differentiate which is of these controls are going to be moving which player. So this section is correct. If self-talking attack is false, that's right. Underneath that I true, I'll add another comment that says check player 1 controls. So this comes only going to apply to player 1. And how do I know it's player 1 statement if the player is equals to 1? And then all of this comes below applies to that. I can move all these and incident did into another statement. Then I can just copy it. All of this that keep it within this self-attacking. Check. So if keep it all indented around here. Here I think now we just check for player 2. I'm just gonna double check that my indentation is correct. So you should line up here and it's lining up. So now if set the player is equals to 2, well I wanna move the same kind of logic but just need to change the keys that are going to doing this. So when I'm moving left instead of pressing the left arrow key, so would you say K to the left and right key to the right, jumping K that up, and then for attacks I'm going to use the numpad. So I'm saying KP1 such keypad when you press 1 on the keyboard, and then to presses 2 the keypad will different attack. So let's just change that to KP1 and then KP2. So that should be fine. That's all the control. However, I'm not actually calling for the fighter 2, so I'm calling it fighter 1, but not fighter 2. So let's just copy this one a bit and then add, and then just need to make sure that variable is actually fighter 2. And target, remember, that's just the large argument of fighter number 1. Let's run this code and I can still move the guy around, jump and attack and all that's fine. Now I can move this guy around, and as well as we can move back and forth, switch back to this animator idle animation, and he's got attack and he's got another attack. And now let's see if he can kill this guy. Just to demonstrate that animation is working correctly on both of them. There's one little thing that I just need to add here, and I may not be obvious straight away, but if I kill the warrior I can actually still move around. So although he's dead, I can still slide and I can still jump. So not great. That is one thing that I need to still address, and that's quite a basic to fix. We go back to the fighter class here, and all of this movement stuff, all the attacks, everything else, it's all wrapped up in a self story. This is statement here is that says if we're not attacking, so if attacking is equals to false, we can do all of that. Well, we just need to add another check here. So we say the self that alive is true. So as long as we've been alive, then we should be able to move around. But if a player is dead, then they should not be able to lie that they're dead. And there we go. I can no longer do anything with this warrior. So now the game is almost there. I say the mechanics are all pretty much in a place, but it just need to polish up a little bit. Few little things we need to add things now. First, add count timer, and then when the game starts, you don't instantly just start fighting each other, but it counts from down from 3, 2, 1, and then you begin. That's not too difficult to add. Let's just add a few more variable for that now. So underneath the colors, here I'm going to add another little style section. So they say define game variable, and now I just need a couple. So we'll say in intro count is equals to 3. So I'll count down from 3, 2, 1, and I need to make the timestamp when the game's first run. So last count update is equals to by game that time that get ticks. No, that's not right. So it's very similar to what I did with the animation. I just take a stamp first of all. I just to check how this is all working. Let's go into the main game loop, and where should we put this? I'll just go at the top here above moving the fighters. I'll just say print into the ground. So let's run this, and okay, so I'm starting off 3. Of course, I can still move them around. So I actually shouldn't be able to move them while I haven't this countdown. So I know it's counting down, yet I haven't added that in, but the player shouldn't be able to move when we're in the countdown phase. So I'm going to add a little if statement here instead. So we'll say update countdown, and we'll say that while we're counting down. So if this intro is count, which remember, let's define as 3 to begin with. If this is that, if this has gone to 0, if so we're finished counting and we're up. Okay, now then we can move the fighter around because now the fight has begun, but still that point I don't want to them to be able to move. So if I put else here, and then means that they are only going to be able to move once the intro count has been reached 0, but until it has reached 0, well, then we want to be able to move that counter down. So first of all, I will just display down here so I can see how much it is, and will display afterwards, and then I'll say update counter timer. So I just, as we did this animation, if I say by game that time that get ticks, so takes the current time, subtract the last animation time to we update the count if a second has already passed. So if it's greater than 1,000 milliseconds, then we subtract 1 from the intro count. And we reset the last count update time. So we set that back to a Pygame that time to that get underscore ticks. So just the same as animation, nothing difference there. And then once we've got that, we print the new intro account, so we just start again 210. I never printed the 3, but it's all working. So if I run this again and try to move, I can move them yet, so it's counting down, and then I'm free to move on camera working, just playing down here anywhere on the screen. So at least we're halfway there. Now display the text on the screen. I actually need to write my own function for this to there no distract direct function to be able to put stuff in the screen. You have to take the text, convert into the image, and then split it just as you normally would with the other image. Before I can do that part, and though I need to define my font now, I don't want to use a built-in font, so I've actually got an open source font here. I've downloaded it and it's within my font folder here. So I'm going to put all the links to all of assets that I've been used in the description. They're all open source and free to use, but I need to make sure I load that font in the first of all. So we'll just come down to the bottom here, just above there. I'm drawing in my background and I say define font, and I will define two different font here at the same time. So the first of I define my counters font. So my count underscore font is equals to pygame.font, that capital font, and then I need to give the location of where my font is. Save in my case, again, you've got your report further here where it then has its fonts and then two rock. So I just need to put assets for slash fonts for slash to rock, and that's wrong that ITEP. And then the second variable is how big I want this font to be. So this one is going to be pretty big, so I'll go with 18. Now the same time I will define another font. I'm using it right away, but I will use it for the counting my score. So every time the player skill, the other one their score is going to increase. So I'll just say font. It's going to be the same font, but it's not going to be as big as I'll set it to 30. So now that my font is created, I can create this function for drawing text. So we can go up here and we'll say draw. Well, no Z function for drawing text. And we say define draw underscore text. So the argument here, it will take our first so all that text. I want to display the font, text color, and the X and Y coordinates that I want to display the text. So I said, you take text and you turn it to the image. So say font that render the text through, and then the color that we want to render in. And then lastly, once that's done, we go to the screen and then split the image at X and Y coordinates. Then that's draw the text function created. So now I can go down to my main game loop where I was working into this intro counter section, and rather than printing it into the current down at the bottom, I'm using this new function I made. So before the update, I just start as else statement will say a display counter timer, and function was draw underscore text that string that I want to feed into it. Well, it's going to be at a true counter, but this is integer, so I need to convert it to the string first. So we'll say string it true count, then the font that I want to use, which I just uploaded in as count font. That color, I don't know if I defined red, but red is what I want to use. And the X coordinate is just going to be the screen height over 2. So kind of roughly in the middle of the screen. So not that's right, screen width over 2 is the height that I want to use. Screen height for the Y coordinate divided by 3. So it's kind of top third. Now I just need to make sure that I've called define the color red first of all, which I have to get red defined, and then it means this should work if I run this now. Okay, there's we go. So I've got 3, 2, 1, and then I can move around. Excellent. Now the other things that I mentioned wanted to add was the score counter for when one of the other players kills other player and then fine. But then kind of goes hand in hand with actually detecting that there's been a kill, then the game is kind of over. Haven't. I don't want to be able to move this guy around. I want to well end it and give me an option to restart the battle again. So let's go and then add few more variables. We go back to the section defining my variables into the couple mode. So we'll do the score variables, and score is just going to be the list. So I could have individual score like score for player 1, player 2. I could save it individual stats as a class, but I just choose to do it another way. So the list just going to correspond to the player 1 and player 2 score. And in the fact, I'll add a little note here that reminds so the player score is just a meaning P1 and P2 That's how the list is structured. So that's the score tracker, but I want to be able to check whether the round is currently over. So we'll say round over to begins as false, and then the idea is when that player kills, the other round is over. So that's true, and that kind of when we can trigger the fact that this round is finished. Let's start other one, but in between the round, I need to wait a little bit of time. I can't just kill the players and everything's 100%. So I like my cooldowns too. So we'll resolve this to 200 milliseconds, 2000 to 2 seconds. Okay, so that will all those variables defined, we can now start putting it in a logic for that. We'll put that into the main game loop. So let's see, we've got a health bar, we've got a countdown, we update the fighters, we draw them on the screen. So I guess yeah, just kind of end of all it. I add the check of players to defeat. So first of all, I want to say whether the current round is still going, we're still alive, or someone already died. So we just say round is over, false, meaning that's we're currently fighting, everything's okay. Well then, as long as we are fighting, I need to because started checking if I want to the player has died or not. So let's just check if the first one has died. So the fighter 1 that alive is now false. It's no longer true. That means that fighter 1 is being killed. If that's the case, well, first of all, let's increase to the score of player 2, which was the index of 1 here. Increase it by 1. So we just scored 1 point. He's killed and the opponent's the round is over. So round over is oops, a round over is equals to true, and then the counter round over time is equals to pi game that time. Don't get these sticks. So again, it's getting familiar. Now, but this is just my countdowns and the countdowns, and then I like it to use here. So let's check if player 1 has died, and then repeat the exact same thing for player 2. So copy this down and we change it to the if I can't really be both dead at the same time. So if player 2 is no longer alive, then it's player 1 who scored to the index 0. So the score is listed to increase round over is true, and the timer is reset, as well as just find how to detect that round is finished. In this case, we run should have down to 0 and testing this skill to this count now. Okay, I guess probably is, yeah, but because I'm not displaying any of this information, I can't really tell. So maybe I just need to do, yeah, let's say print score. Okay, let's try to kill this again and kill the wizard. Of course, the wizard should, suppose I put this in one place rather again. So if the wizard kills the warrior, then it's going to trigger where we go. Okay, so now it shows that it has triggered and the score got from 0 to 0 to 1. And because the wizard has now scored, I point is killed his opponent. Okay, so this section is working correctly and round is being set to true. No, it isn't. Yes, it's round over is being set to true. So this part is working correctly and I need to handle this end of round situation. Well, I already have the statement here. It says if round over is false, then do this all. Then I can just add an else to do it. So if round is over is true, meaning that we've just finished the round. Well, the first thing I wanted to do is display this big splash kind of screen image that says round is over and someone's victorious. So I just say victory. I got this image here and we need to first of all load this image victory. So before I actually do that, let's just push a pass. I need to make this memory the image. So we all go back to where I'm loading an all others image. So I've got my background, my spreadsheet just underneath. Then let's load another image, load victory image. So victory underscore image equals to pygame that image that load. And I won't explain all this again because I've gone over a few times, but it's assets image, this time it's icon. And it's bakery.png that convert alpha. Okay, so that's going to load this image for me. And now we come back down here as well, handling all around over stuff. So instead of this pass, I will say display victory image. So screen that victory image. In the coordinates, I just go with 360 and 150. So I kind of display around this with the get less in the middle. So let's try this again and again. I forgot to remove the counter run over, kill this dude, and there we go, displaying victory at the top. And it's not easily resetting anything back through it because the fight over. But we're not starting a new fight in addition, so that this guy can still move around even though the fight is still over. So the couple of things to deal here. First of all, we've got this timer created right now. Now this round is over time has been taken. So now let's use this timer and count down so we can see if I give that time that get ticks, if the current time minus the time that when the round has finished. If that's greater than the round over cooldown, then that's set if I think it was 3 seconds. So if 3 seconds have passed, then we can reset everything back to start. So round over comes false, the intro counts back to the 3, so we can reset the counter as well. Then I actually need to reset the player, so both players instances need to make again. So we just copy from up here and then put this down here. I could do a different way, add a reset method to the fighter class. I just a little bit more work, so I thought this for this game kind of game. And this is simply enough and it works pretty well. So let's run this again and let's just go over and swap around again. This time, so it's a wizard to kill the warrior. So they should stand for about 3 seconds and there you go. Then everything resets to counter, goes back, the health gets resets and it's just back to normal how it was before. So that's one of the issue picks and another issue. Two, it's why I can still move even though the player's dead. So let's address one real quick. And the way we're going to do that is by feeding this round over variable into the fighter class. And I'm going to put it into the move methods because that's where movement is handled. So just this last argument here, we're going to add in our round over. Now we head back over the fighter class. And this is the move method. Here we need to make sure that we're taking that argument back out round over and we just add it to this if statement. So this is if statement. Here is essentially saying that as long as we're not attacking and we're still alive, we can move around. Well, let's just add a third condition. So as long as the round is over is false, then we can do all those things below. We can run around and so on. And so I'm just going to remember this time to set this count time to 0. I don't have to wait each time. So if I run over kill this guy, now I can't move anywhere. So I'm stuck until the countdown resets. Now I can move again. Okay, so that's all working pretty well. Now, there was one thing that I mentioned through, which was the score. I'm keeping track of the score, but I'm not displaying them anywhere. So let's just add the score counter underneath both of these health bars. And because I've already written most of the functionality here for drawing text and so on, I can just use those same function again. So we go back into the main game loop here, and underneath the section, it's a show player stats. I got the two health bars, so just under them, let's call the draw text function again, and text I want to put on first of all the player 1 is p1 call on the space, and then we add down this score. So player 1 score, remember this from the list, so it's index 0, but this will be the integer, so we need to convert that into a string before we can use it then given the font. So that I defined a different font earlier, which was a score font color red, X, coordinate Y, and coordinate. Then we're done. Now we do this exact same thing. Copy it down for player 2 score. So change that to P2 and change that to 1. And then the X coordinates just moves along 580. So it's going to the right hand side of the screen. And there we go. We've got the two scores. Now if I kill this dude, player 1 score is just gonna buy 1. And let's go the other way. Around this dude, there go the players to score going up and by 1. So now we're nearly there. I think there's only a couple of things to add before we finish this game. First of all, this is ugly looking rectangle. Now they were fine to be able to see what's going on. And now you know when I develop these games, I always use this kind of stuff because it's really help visualize what's happening, helps you debug things, but I don't need them anymore. The game is pretty much done. So let's go ahead and get rid of this rectangle. Where was I drawing them? So there's was definitely one draw method where I was drawing I was drawing that image, that's rectangle being drawn. So let's get rid of that. And also within the attack method, I was drawing a rectangle here, which I don't need. And once I've done that, I don't actually need arguments. So remember, I added temporary. So, alright. So, the very last thing to do is to add some music. Because right now, it's a little bit dull. The mechanics are all there, but there's no sounds to the game. So, I'll just add a little bit of depth. So, it as well, and adding a music is not too difficult. So, there's going to be a music and there's going to be sound effects. And to be able to use them, we need to import another module from Pygame. So, right at the top here, we'll say from Py game import mixer, then down there before we initialize Pygame, we initialize the mixer in the same way, mixer.init, and then we can start loading in all the audio files. So we'll come down here and just keep all the kind of assets together. So above my images, but just below all this data stuff, I just another comment to say load music and sound. So first of all, load the music. So the music that game that makes your music, that music low, and the location. So I'm not gonna explain this again, but the same kind of logic. I need to make sure I've got it the correct location relative to the root folder. So this is the audio file, audio folder, and it's called music, music.mp3. So that will load it in. Then I need to set volume for it because for some reason, well, on the computer anyways, I found that soundtrack is quite loud. So music set underscore, and I'm going to set this hard its original volume. So we'll load it. But when you actually need to tell Pygame to play it, so you say Pygame that mixer that music that play 1005,000, yeah. So you can play around this variable, but it basically just means that if going to keep looping over and over, and I don't want it to become really loud like straight away. So it comes and kind of just faded in slow. So I'll run it. I don't know if you're able to hear this, but I'll run it anyway and see. So I hope that was picked up, but that was just playing the music in the background. Now I'm going to comment it out now because I don't really want it to be there while I'm speaking to the music. Is done now. I need to load sound effects, so I'm going to save them as individual variables. There's only going to be two. There's going to be one for warrior and one for the wizard. So the warrior one is a sword. So sword effects equals to pygame that mixers that sound, and it saves to assets forward slash audio forward slash sword. So we loaded that one. I'll set the volume of this one as well, and you can play around with this, just the kind of adjust them to what you think is right. And then we load in the second one, which is going to be magic effect. So the location is the same, but it's just different file name, magic effects. And this one I'll set it a little bit louder, so I'll just run it to make sure it's load everything. But there's of course, now I need to actually trigger them. So whenever I'm calling an attack, I need to make sure that I call this sounds effect as well. Now, the issue here is similar to what I can already covered in a few other aspects of this is what I'm loading here within the main file needs to be passed through the Python class if I'm going to make the use in there. So that means that I need to add another argument to these classes. So right at the end here, I'm just gonna add another one that says source effect. So for the fighter one, that's warrior so sounds effect, he's gonna get, and then the wizard's going to magic effect. Now we need to make sure, because I've actually called this again down here, so it's just down here when the sound round the sets, I need to make sure that I paste it here because there is also needs to be additional sound effect. Otherwise, it'll get error when the round starts. So paste that here. There now we can go into the Python class and then make sure this sound effect back out here. So add another argument, say sounds, and then just where we've got all the attacks variable bunched together, I'll add another one and says attack sounds is equals to sound. And now to call this, all you need to do is go to my attack method, which is somewhere down here. There it within here, and as soon as I execute that attack, I basically all of this stuff here, so it doesn't matter if the attack connects, which is this second check here. In fact, let's add a comment, so execute attack. So as soon as the attack is executed, we want to play the sound effect, so it's set that attack underscore sound that play. Alright, I go back to the main file and run this again, and there you should be able to hear the sound effects coming through. And that's it. The game is pretty much complete. I can reset some of this variable that I kind of mess up around with for debugging, so I can set the intro count back to 3. I can make sure that they have full health when they start rather than just 10 health, and that will be the game complete. So we'll set the music and the game finish. And there you go. That's a complete fighting game in Python made using Pygame from start to finish. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as really helps and supports the channels. Thanks for very much for watching.